Good morning. Good morning. It's Charmaine with Hammond International, and I'm also representing Fuse Social today, an organization that I just love in Fort McMurray. Fuse Social is actually hosting a series of webinars and educational programs for the social profits, and today we are going to be talking to Violet Poon, who is a friend of mine and an incredible expert in HR, specifically in the world of nonprofits. And I've invited Violet to come on today and talk about some very innovative practices and approaches to HR that Violet has been involved with. So let me introduce our guest today, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about her personally as well. So Violet is a human resource consultant. She provides recruitment and selection coordination to 5 nonprofit organizations, and she has a primary focus on recruitment. She's created recruitment and retention plans for diverse workplaces, and she has actually worked with 250 internationally educated professionals, IEPs, from over 50 countries to successfully gain employment. And she is also developing innovative recruitment practices and strategies, and is building relationships with community partners, which is really cool. We're going to talk about that today. She is passionate about supporting professional development in the field of HR, and she's also mentored a lot of students in the HR world and supervised practicums for them. So welcome, Violet.
Thank you so much for having me, Charmaine. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, and I'm really excited to talk about this topic. You and I have known each other a long time, Violet. We go way back, and we've masterminded together. We've presented at some of the same conferences together. And one of the things that I love about you, Violet, is just the depth to which you're working with nonprofits in a really innovative way. And you and I were talking offline before we went live today that with this whole concept of HR and collaboration, you've actually been working in I guess you could call it a strategic and collaborative way of providing HR solutions to nonprofit organizations, but through what you call a cluster approach. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and what this whole cluster approach to HR is.
Yeah, well, it's really cool, actually, the work that I'm doing. I do have passion for the nonprofit sector. Have been working in the nonprofit sector for just about 15 years now, and really just love the work that's being done in the community and supporting lots of individuals in the community. So I've actually been working in my role for about 16 months now, and it's a shared service model. So basically the 5 nonprofit organizations here in Edmonton, it's actually been active for a number of years now. They've identified that instead of having an HR person within each of the organizations, it makes better sense actually to use a shared service model. So that shared service model is looking at having one person as a consultant to come in and provide support to them, and as you mentioned, primarily in recruitment. So it's a very collaborative approach. The 5 executive directors are very collaborative. They have conversations with me, just making sure that I'm always looking out for the best interests of them as an organization, but also as a cluster. So it's very cool, and so I get to represent. I say that I have one finger in each of these 5 organizations, and just always aware of who I'm representing, in that moment. So it's a neat kind of a concept, and also very much big picture thinking, and so that's very neat as well.
I think it's a great approach. I do a lot of work in the HR world, more from the perspective of consulting and speaking, and I've worked with nonprofits around the world. And what I hear time and time again, Violet, and I know you do too, is that many HR organizations, unless they're a significant size, simply don't have the funds to have a designated human resource professional on staff. And so therefore, the responsibility for recruitment, retention, training, hiring, orientation, orientation, dealing with employee issues, and if they're unionized, dealing with collective agreement issues. All of that falls on the hands of the executive director and sometimes the personnel committee on a board. So I love the fact that you've found a solution to support executive directors and leaders by collaborating with other organizations to get their HR needs. Is that what you're seeing in the world of nonprofits as well, that many of them just don't have the budget for a dedicated HR staff?
That's exactly it, especially when you're talking about the number of, I'll say, smaller nonprofit organizations, maybe, up to 50 people, but they still have staffing needs. And for some of these organizations, they have to hire a number of part-time positions. And some of those positions, they might fill, say, with students or new graduates that might move on. So there might be a little bit of, ongoing recruitment for some positions. And as you mentioned, if they don't have a dedicated person, but they don't necessarily require maybe a full-time person or maybe not even a part-time person, but really it goes with the flow in terms of what their needs are. So the really unique thing and really great benefit of using the cluster model as well is that some organizations will have high recruitment needs at certain times of the year. And so certainly, I can work on that, and that's my priority. For example, one organization that I support during the summertime, it gets quite busy because they're trying to fill positions that will begin for the school year in September. But throughout the year, they may not have a lot of recruitment needs. So it's actually very beneficial for them because if you had a dedicated person, you may not be as busy for 6 months of the year, but then quite busy for maybe 2 to 3 months, right? So to use a consultant in this way, I think could really make a lot of sense for some organizations. And even some organizations that may be a little bit larger, maybe have an HR person as well. Like I said, there might be times when there's a lot of work and they may want to look at outsourcing a part of that HR support to a consultant as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. Now, in terms of all of you that are joining us today live through Google Hangouts or through Webinar Jam, you're welcome to use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a little button that says chat, and you can just type your questions or comments in for Violet. I'll keep checking over to see them and read them out. I do have a few people that actually couldn't be with us live today, but I promised Violet that I'd bring their questions forward, and I know they're going to be questions that lots of the people listening now and later to the replay certainly have. One of the things that I appreciated about when I interviewed you for the HR reporter with Wendy Thorne from Suncor, what a great conversation that was with the two of you, by the way. And we were talking about innovation in the world of HR. And one of the things that I heard from both you and Wendy is that now we live in a time where we just don't have a choice but to be innovative in terms of how we work with people and how we run our organization. Can you talk, Violet, a little bit more about why this concept of innovation is so important for nonprofits?
Yeah, for sure, Charmaine. So focusing on the recruitment side of things, there's always that traditional recruiting of, posting jobs and having people apply to them through the traditional means. But I always like to look at creative strategies and kind of thinking outside of the box. So for myself, not only do I believe that I'm representing 5 organizations, but I really try to advocate for the nonprofit sector specifically. So I look at ways of connecting with job seekers that are out there in the community. So for example, one of the things that I've done in the past is connect with the Alberta Works offices here in Edmonton and go out and do presentations about the cluster group and the positions that I recruit for to give insight into that, but also talking about what it's like to work in the nonprofit sector. So how could that be different from the corporate sector? What are some benefits? What is the workplace culture like? So that people have an idea of that. So I look at doing those type of presentations to all job seekers. So whether that be post-secondary students, whether whether that be immigrants, anybody that's looking for work. I really like to get out there and talk to people about that. And I find that doing those presentations is a little bit it's a little bit more tailored and more specific than maybe just attending a job fair, right? As an employer, so I really like to look for those opportunities, and as well as the use of, for example, social media. I know that a lot of positions that I recruit for, word of mouth is very powerful, right? And to try to find people that might be looking, or people that are already employed that might be looking, but you don't know that. So I also like to use social media as a tool as well.
Yeah, beautiful. And we're going to talk about that today. One of the things when you mentioned collaboration and innovation, I just want to give a very, very heartfelt shout out for all of the organizations in Fort McMurray. Oh my gosh, what they've been through in the last 6 weeks. And I have a lot of clients and friends that live in Fort McMurray. And I just want to say that through this devastating situation with the forest fires, I have never seen such acts of collaboration and support and innovation and unconditional kindness that's going on with the social profit organizations and supporting one another, and also just to people around the world coming out to support Fort McMurray. And I know that as the organizations now are heading home, there's going to be many challenges for them: recruiting volunteers, recruiting staff, helping staff cope with compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma, helping the teams work in a different way to meet the needs of the community. So I think given that scenario, is it fair to say from your HR perspective, Violet, that there's going to be a lot of perhaps new challenges in that particular community right now with what's going on for them?
Yeah, I would agree with you, Charmaine. And yeah, I also want to say it's really been amazing and heartfelt what's happening in Fort McMurray. I've had an opportunity to go up there and do some work through the years as well, and work with organizations. So it's amazing work that they're doing, and I think it certainly will be a challenge in terms of recruiting. I know that for myself, I know that just recruiting for positions here in Edmonton, I know that there's some individuals that I have spoken with and that I've been in, have applied for positions that have indicated that they likely don't have plans on returning anytime soon to Fort McMurray. So I think from the perspective of the community there and nonprofit organizations there, I think that collaboration, and I think having some creativity and looking at some planning, maybe some short-term planning, will be very key in terms of just getting back up and in operation again. But again, we talk so much about that collaboration, and I think that is so key, because there's so many organizations that will be supporting individuals in various needs, and we've seen the community kind of come together, right? And how can that approach be utilized and be very effective still for individual organizations? And I think that it can be an effective way to approach things, for sure.
Yes. Yeah, that whole coming together is so important, which actually leads me to one of the questions that came into me through email from someone who couldn't be here today. Her question was, she lives in a community where right now she's not aware of any cluster approach to human resources for nonprofits. She's a smaller organization. I think she said there's 10 of them, 10 staff, part-time and full-time, plus her. So 11 employees in the organization. And they have quite a bit of turnover. So she's often in a recruitment phase, but they're also finding too that they're needing some mentoring and training and support. And she's really open to partnering with other organizations in her particular community to get a cluster approach going, or to at least start the conversation. What are some of the things that with this cluster approach to HR, what makes it successful? If you were advising somebody around what they need to consider to make it successful for everybody, what would you tell them?
I think first of all, in terms of that approach, if there's a need for an organization to have this type of support, to certainly start having the conversations with other executive directors about maybe some of their needs in that same area. So if it's within HR and recruitment, but it's not. It's, I think, being very clear on what those needs are, first of all, for the organization. So is it primarily recruitment supports that they're looking for, or is it more of the full HR scope of work? So that could be recruitment, it could be a training component of it, it could be, you know, looking at their retention and supporting them with that. It could be in terms of performance management and supporting their supervisors. So I think having those conversations with other executive directors, determining, you know, where there might be some needs, where there might be some similar needs, and then before going forward and trying to find that consultant, is being very clear in terms of, you know, how are they going to manage that? How is the individual, the consultant, going to manage the workload? So if you have 5 organizations or 3 organizations, you know, how many hours per week may be dedicated to each organization? Is that the approach they want to take? Or do they just want to say, you know, our needs, our organization needs are great in the summertime, but not so much during the rest of the year. But we know that the other organizations as part of the cluster group, you know, have ongoing needs. So I think the executive directors need to be really clear and all on the same page on how they're going to approach that, because I think that's what makes it work. If you have one organization that has higher needs, are the other organizations okay with that? And I also think it's important that they talk about, for the consultant to be very clear on how are they prioritizing the needs. So if they're spending the majority of their time on one organization because those recruitment needs are higher, but you know, is that getting in the way of the work that for the other organization? So fortunately for me, I'm able to kind of manage my time and manage my priorities. And if I ever have any concerns or questions, to have that conversation with the executive directors. But I think that the EDs would, you know, need to kind of have a clear idea going into this, how the consultant should be managing their time.
Right. Yeah, I think that's so important, that communication, because everyone listening today and later to the download knows that communication is so critical for relationships and trust. And I'm hearing you say, Violet, that trust is one of the key foundations to make this work, and open communication and having a very clear plan where people know how this is going to work so that it doesn't damage trust if something goes a bit sideways.
Yeah, that is for sure. And I will tell you, I prefer a lot of communication. I like that communication with my EDs and with the hiring managers, because I always like to see the big picture. And sometimes if I don't have enough information, I will seek it out, because I always want to see the big picture. I always want to know what's happening, because I'm not physically located in each of these sites. It's quite key in my mind that having that communication is what makes this successful, right? Because you need to know what's happening and how you can best support people and what's going on. So yeah, for sure.
Very much so. You know, I was listening to a really interesting presentation at the end of May. Fuse Social and Prosperity Canada brought together some of the social profit directors from Fort McMurray for a planning day, and they're going to continue doing these as a form of support to the executive directors and leaders in the social profit world in Fort McMurray. And there was a really interesting presentation from Kathy Brothers, who is with Capacity Canada Social Prosperity, and she had a great comment about in times of busyness and in times of chaos or change, it is so very important for organizations to stay true to their mandate. And I hear from a lot of my nonprofit clients is that sometimes in order to achieve other dollars, you know, to be selected for different grants and funding, for example, sometimes nonprofits really have to stretch their mandates, and then it can create challenges for them in service delivery and recruitment, retention. And I'm expecting that we could actually take that wisdom from Kathy and apply it to an HR cluster, that it's really important in an HR cluster that the organizations that are partnering together be really clear on their mandate. Because one of the things that you said earlier to me offline, Violet, was that one of the challenges can be that in a cluster approach, you may have organizations that are partnering and collaborating, but they're actually sort of, I don't have a better word than competition, but they're in competition for the same staff and volunteers. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's various nonprofit organizations and they'll have various roles that they're recruiting for, but there's going to be maybe some similarities with some of the programs and services that they're providing. And when you're talking about recruitment, they may be looking for individuals that have some similar experience and skills. So I think that one of the key things to always keep in mind is that I don't like to use the word necessarily poaching, but just in terms of the clarity of, what, like just in terms of explaining it, I think it's really important to be really mindful in that professionalism and conduct as a consultant. I'll say is that I know that there's great people working in the cluster group and they could be really great to fill other positions within the cluster, but it's not my approach at all. And to keep that professionalism, now if people apply on their own, I often say, well, that's their decision if they choose to apply for any of the jobs that I'm recruiting for, but I would never approach it that I would approach somebody to do that, right? So I think it's being very clear that when you have a cluster group, that the organizations know that there might be some movement within the cluster or outside of the cluster as well, and to kind of respect that, right, with job seekers. But I think it leads to a bigger conversation, Charmaine, is that if you see a number of people leaving an organization or a certain position, it really brings up the question as to, what might be happening within that organization or that department for the organization to kind of examine, right? So that we can start looking at retention. And so, yeah, it's, I think you have to be, again, very clear from the executive director's perspective on when things like that happen and how they would want a consultant to kind of handle those situations, and for the consultant also to be very mindful of, how their recruitment practices and just making sure that they have that professional conduct.
Perfect. So it sounds like if there's groups, to go back to this individual's questions, if you're looking at setting up a cluster or exploring that in your community, you've got to bring the right partners to the table, have a smaller number of people. This isn't, 20 people clustered together, 20 organizations clustered together. That would be too many. So a small number of organizations that are willing to be flexible and adaptable. You've got to set it up where the expectations are super clear. To find the right consultant to work with you. So if you have a cluster group that has mostly needs of retention and maybe some personnel issues like conflict or some sensitive or performance issues, then you want to be choosing that HR consultant that has a lot of expertise in recruitment and personnel issues. And then what you're also saying is the importance of that ongoing communication and the partners being really clear on what each other's needs are, so that feathers don't get ruffled if it looks like one group is getting more service, because that's the time that they need more recruitment, for example, in the summer or whatever time frame that would be. And then the other part I heard you saying is staying in touch with the partners and just following this up and checking in with them so that their trust and communication is maintained with one another.
Yeah, for sure, all of those. And I'll add one thing as well. One of the things that I think is really important and to make it work is also for the consultant really to understand the organizations in terms of their mandate, their vision, their mission, but also understand the organization values and culture. So one of the things that I really wanted to do was when I started was to go into some of these organizations and just observe and just be there to get more familiar with the culture. Because one of the great benefits, again, with that big picture approach to this is that I've had opportunities to sit in on interviews for a specific position, and that person may not be a great fit within the culture of that organization, but I've been very fortunate to refer them to another organization within the cluster, and then they got hired on within the cluster. So I think that that's really important as well, to recognize that each organization within a cluster group is going to have their own uniqueness, right? And for the consultant really to understand that, so that when they are representing that organization and doing work on behalf of that organization, they're very clear on what that looks like, right? So yeah, that's very beneficial as well.
Perfect. One of the other questions that came in is, this was from a organization, I'm not sure how big they are, a nonprofit organization, and they were saying that they're not very active in using social media. They do use Facebook, for Facebook events, to promote their events, and they use Facebook and Twitter to share messages from their organization, to share event information, and to provide tips and strategies for the families they work with. But that's the extent to which right now they're using social media. And her question was, she felt like she should be using social media in a much bigger way to support their HR needs, whether that's hiring, recruitment, or inviting people to training and orientation sessions. You use social media in a really interesting way related to HR. Can you share what you're doing in the HR world around social media?
For sure. I think that when in using social media, it's very easy to get overwhelmed and not really, there's so many different types of platforms out there and different things that you could be on social media all day. And so I have found actually there is a company page for the HR cluster group here. And so what I have done with that is really gone and utilize it so that when I have job postings, I will go and post the job postings and let people know that the website that I maintain for the cluster group has been updated and new job postings, or if there's some specific job postings, I'll post it on the company page. And it's really great because that company page has grown significantly. It's more than doubled in the last year in terms of the number of members that now follow the page. And what I do is on the signature of my email, I actually put a link to the LinkedIn group page, so that anybody who gets an email from me can click on the LinkedIn icon and go to the LinkedIn company page and choose to follow us. So I would say I'm a fan of LinkedIn, just in terms of the professional networking opportunities that it provides, but also sharing job postings. So I share it on the company page to the members or followers, and then I also share it on my personal LinkedIn as well, so that all of my connections will also see that. I have used Twitter a little bit as well, and I do not have a company Twitter page, but the 5 organizations that I do support in the cluster, they each do have Twitter. And so if an organization does utilize Twitter, what I would recommend is that when there's new job postings, for them to tweet it out and link it to the job posting, just making sure the use of hashtags as well, to try to broaden it out for job seekers. So Twitter hasn't generated a lot of success, but it does get some views and it does get some retweets from people that have a lot of followers. So in terms of Facebook, I really haven't utilized Facebook much. I find that it can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming and just the amount of information on there. So my preference has been using LinkedIn.
Yeah, I agree with you on the LinkedIn piece. And where I've seen Twitter and Facebook be helpful is not so much in the recruitment or the management of HR issues, but it's more about building relationships with your community. So for example, if your organization provides programs for children, I'll give you an example. One of the organizations I love in Edmonton, I just had the opportunity to speak at their annual general meeting, their 40th year community options. So I'm not sure if you're listening, Margaret, but if you are, hello. And one of the things that I love about when they're posting and their banners, their marketing materials, it all gives the look and feel of an organization who are really dedicated to serving children and to helping children be resilient and to have the tools that they need in life. And that's what I love about social media, is that an organization continually, through the pictures they use on Facebook, the words that they use to describe themselves and their events on Facebook, they can create that feeling for the public about the culture of the organization. So if I was a job seeker or even a volunteer looking for a volunteer placement, and I was following different organizations in the community that I live in, I would probably find myself attracted to those organizations whose mandate and whose values and mission and vision are so clear, because I'm seeing it displayed in every post on Twitter and Facebook. And I think that's where we could use social media, those two platforms, Facebook and Twitter, to help us, is by painting that picture for people.
I agree with you 100%. And the organizations I support, that is how they use, for example, I'll say Facebook, they're posting photos of the children and the families that are accessing their services and programs, using it as a tool to inform people about those programs that they have and how to register, for example. But again, from that perspective of the HR, I'll agree with you 100%, because if you're looking at those photos and images and content, you are getting a feel for what that organization does, but also a little bit of feel of the, the culture within the organization. And I've had people say to me, I know about this organization, I've heard about them, I've gone and looked at their website and their social media, and it's an organization that I want to work for. So it's in some ways it's that tool, you're more just sharing information, but it gives people a real good insight into the organization as well.
Yes. One of the other innovations I'm seeing, and I'd love your input on this, one of the other innovations I'm seeing in the world of human resources services is how we use technology now to train our employees. So for example, one of the groups that I'm working with, they're actually going to be recording all of their training sessions and their orientations, even some of the board meetings where they focus more on strategy and business planning, not the day-to-day conversations, but they're actually going to record those and make some videos so that when they have new staff and volunteers joining the organization, they have these tools, these videos or audios that they can then share with the new employee or volunteer. And another thing I'm seeing is just how we use virtual programs such as what we're doing today, a webinar to provide training. So there's so many ways that I think we could innovatively use technology, if we're just looking at technology and different platforms, to be able to connect with people. We use Skype to have meetings or GoToMeeting. We can do training virtually. Lots of ways that we can use these platforms to help us in our organization. What's your thoughts on that? What are you seeing?
I would say that for nonprofit organizations, they may not have been, it may be underutilized. I agree with you that I'm a big supporter and a big fan of looking at all different ways of getting information out there and sharing information with staff. So I have seen people conduct interviews using Skype. That is one way that they have done when the individual might be actually on vacation or maybe have not relocated to Edmonton, that they have used Skype to conduct interviews. But I would say that probably it is not utilized as much as it should be, and it really could be, because some organizations may have a number of sites. Maybe it could be within the city or even within the province, say, and I think that using technology can really bring people closer together. Another way is also just in terms of having those like Skype meetings as well, so that you have two different offices in different locations, and for people to see each other so that they can feel connected, I think is a great way that to try to bring people closer together, right? So I would say that I don't think technology is maybe being used as much as it could be, but I think that there's certainly ways that it could be used efficiently in terms of training, in terms of connecting people so that people can see that kind of face-to-face, but a little bit in recruitment, just in terms of conducting interviews using Skype, for sure.
I like the idea of using platforms like Skype for interviews versus a phone call interview. So if you've got to interview someone who just can't come physically to do a live interview with you, often we've resorted to phone interviews. And what I love about Skype is that you get to see the person. You can create a relationship with them so much quicker when you can see a person versus just hearing them on the phone. But I've done lots of interviews in my day, and I've had the not so good experience of doing phone interviews, and then when you meet the person, so you haven't even seen them before, and then when you meet the person for the second interview, who you thought you were interviewing is not who shows up.
Yeah.
So Skype interviews can be great because you get to see the person and interact just like if you're sitting across the boardroom table. So I really encourage organizations, if you're using phone interviews right now, try using Skype interviews. What do you see the benefits of Skype interviews?
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It's just, it gives you that face-to-face interaction. It makes it a little bit more personal. But although it's great, I would also suggest that to have a face-to-face conversation or a second interview with that person, or if you're at a stage where that person is great and you've done their reference checks and you really feel that's the person you want to hire, but you know, it just gives you a little bit more just comfort level if you do get a chance to actually see them face to face as well. And so I think Skype is kind of the next best thing to that, to have that conversation, because I agree with you. The phone is not quite the same as having this the interaction and seeing each other, right? So yeah.
I remember volunteering to help a colleague of mine. He ran a nonprofit organization, and he was going to be doing some interviews for a senior management position in his organization. And it was just when Facebook had come out. So Facebook was not nearly what it was then as it is now. And he just, something was sort of niggling at him to go and look at this person's Facebook page. And so on paper, this candidate was just hands down the perfect candidate. And then when he started looking at the Facebook page, and it wasn't actually the Facebook page, it was the blogs that the individual was writing. He had kind of an online diary, and this individual was, what they were writing about in the blog was so not in alignment with this organization's mission and values and the culture and the words that they use. And so it became quite alarming to him. He actually, I don't think he went through with the interview. This person was shortlisted and then did an interview. And I thought that was really interesting that, you know, social media can really go against people right now too. You really want to be watching what you post, especially if you're a job seeker.
Yes, I've actually utilized Facebook as well, and due to the volume, I'm not able to look at all candidates, but sometimes if there's kind of the top candidates, and I may look and do a Google of their name or look at their social media. And I think from a job seeker's perspective, that is really important to be aware of that, that what you're putting out there, if it can be viewed by people and shared by people, you know, it doesn't go away, right? And just to be aware of that and what you're putting out there. And yeah, and sometimes organizations will see that what someone has posted is not aligned with their values, and that may sway their decision, right? So I think that that's a really great point to bring up in terms of employers' use. And again, employers, I think, due to the volume of the number of applications that they receive, they can be going through and, you know, and looking up information on each individual. But if it might be between a few individuals, or, you know, out of curiosity, and they just want to see what's out there, then it's not always a bad idea to do that, right? And to see what information might be out there.
Yes. You know, one of the other ways that I'm noticing nonprofits are moving towards as well, in terms of innovation and technology and human resources, is moving towards online applications. So where people are, I'm seeing this a lot with the volunteer sector, as well as now paid employees. Is that a trend that you're seeing now, a movement towards the online application process as a step one?
Yeah, some organizations certainly are utilizing that. I've seen that also for volunteer opportunities and for employment opportunities, that they will have a form on a website, on the company website, for individuals to submit and do. I think it's great because it can do some of that pre-screening as well. So if you could have a tailored form and you could ask some of those questions in advance, so that could be very helpful. Now, for myself, in terms of utilizing the providing support to the cluster group, I actually utilize one email address that I receive all applications, and they come directly to me. So I don't have any screening software, any processes. Sometimes people ask me that. I actually look at every single application that comes that will come directly into my inbox. And so it's sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming when you have a high number of competitions and a high number of resumes that you receive, but also some great benefits to that as well. One of the organizations, they actually do have an online form that they use, and then they just forward that over to me as well, so that I get that information and they've received that information as well.
Wow, that's a lot of work when you're when you're checking every single application. But I know you place a lot of value on being able to thoroughly assess the applicants as they're coming in.
You know, Charmaine, it's funny. It can be time consuming, but I really see the benefits of that, again, with that big picture. So you have somebody that's applying for a position and you're looking, and they might not have the skills or the experience that would be a good fit for that specific position that they've applied for, but they're actually not necessarily aware that the person that's on the other end, for myself as a consultant, is actually recruiting for 5 organizations. So I've had the opportunity to say to somebody, would you like to be considered for this position? Or, you know, we have a number of postings on the website here. Please have a look and go look, and there are other positions that you might be interested in. So from that big picture perspective, I believe that it actually provides a lot of benefit. And I don't think I don't think that I would ever change it, that I would want to see everyone, because then I can really see if it's good for that specific position they've applied for, or if they might be, you know, better suited for another position that I'm recruiting for.
Perfect. There was another question that came in advance, and it was about actually reference checks. And the question was, when someone has applied for a position, what this particular executive director, now small organization, so she does all the recruitment herself, but she's most interested in looking at something like a cluster approach, because she has times of the year that are really busy for things like recruitment for the summertime programs, for example. So they hire a lot of part-time and summer students from colleges and universities. And then the rest of the year is not too many demands. But one of the things that she was saying last year when she was doing her recruitment and all the reference checks, she was going on to LinkedIn and reading all the references, and she wondered, her gut told her to still go and do the live reference checks, even though somebody had 10, 15, 20 different endorsements and recommendation letters on LinkedIn. Do we still need to be doing that? I'm assuming yes, because you could post whatever on there.
100% yes, and I will let you know. So I conduct those reference checks on behalf of most of my clients, and we actually do 3 references for each candidate. In the past, it might have been 2, but actually now it's 3, and we ask for previous and current supervisors if possible. We know that we can't always get 3 references that fall into that category, but they all must be professional references. We do not ask for personal references. And 100% yes to be doing reference checks, although a person may have glowing recommendations, for example, on LinkedIn, because you might be asking some very specific questions related to that position. But I find that when you're doing reference checks, you can really gauge in terms of hearing people on their phone and reading into sometimes the tone, reading into sometimes people want to share information, but they don't want to directly say something. And so sometimes just having that phone conversation and hearing a person's voice and what they're saying, and sometimes actually as a consultant, sometimes you can just read into a little bit, or you might have a follow-up question to something that you may have heard, right, that you just need some clarity on. So I am a 100% believer that it's very important to do the reference checks, and yeah, ideally if you have time to do 3, that would be great. I know that not all organizations may have the ability to do all 3, but at least 2 for sure. I would recommend organizations to do that.